Maybe it all started like this, with a sound that was no longer there, the sound of their paws around the house, that little rhythm that seemed normal before, until one day it disappeared. And that's when you understood that it wasn't just a dog walking back and forth. It was a presence. It was company. It was a form of love so constant that it only became visible when silence took its place. And maybe that's why you're here, because a part of you still feels like your dog isn't completely gone. Because sometimes you look towards that corner where I slept, because without realizing it, you still turn around when you hear something similar to his footsteps. Because there are absences that do not behave like a farewell, but rather like a presence that changed shape. In this video, we are not going to talk about a loss as if it were the end of everything. We are going to talk about what many people feel, but almost never dare to say out loud. That feeling that the bond with a dog does not end when its body leaves. That strange, deep, and sometimes even inexplicable impression that they are still close, that they still accompany, that, even if you can't see them, something of them remains with you in your routine, in the house, in your memory, and perhaps in even deeper places. If you have felt guilty for continuing to wait for his sound at the door, if you have wondered why the house changed so much after he left, if there are days when his memory not only hurts but seems to touch your soul, this video can give you something that perhaps you have needed for a long time: comfort, meaning, and a different way of looking at that bond you lived with him. Because sometimes pain doesn't just come from absence. Sometimes it comes from not understanding why that love continues to feel so alive. And today we're going to get right in there. What many owners have experienced after losing their dog, in the small everyday signs, in the memories that do not fade, in the strange silence of the house, and in that spiritual possibility that, for many, is neither madness nor imagination, but a continuation of love. Think about this for a moment. If his love marked every corner of your life while he was here, why would it have to disappear completely just because you can't see it anymore? There are bonds that are not broken the way we were taught. There are presences that do not make noise, but continue to accompany. And maybe that explains why you still feel something when you pass by the place where he ate. Why do you still look at the door reflexively? Why even now, after all, a part of you still talks about him in the present tense? You're not exaggerating. You're not being weak. And you're not the only person who has felt that. After leaving, their dog found another way to stay. Stay until the end, because what we are going to see can help you understand why some goodbyes do not close. Not because something has been left pending, but because certain bonds were not made to end with death. And when you understand that, the silence no longer feels the same. After a dog is gone, almost everyone talks about the moment of loss. But few people talk about what happens next, not the big, obvious pain that appears in the first days, but one of those little things that begin to hurt in silence. Those that seem simple from the outside, but inside, they disarm you. Because losing a dog doesn't just change a routine, change the climate of the house, change the way you walk in the door. It changes even the way silence feels. Before you arrived and there was someone waiting for you. Sometimes it was at the door. Sometimes a few seconds later. Sometimes you heard his paws running from another room as if he knew exactly it was you. It didn't matter if your day had been hard, if you came tired, sad, or with a full head. He didn't need explanations. It was just there. As if part of its mission was to remind you every day that for someone your return was the most important thing in the world. And when that disappears, it is not only noticeable in the heart, it shows in the body, in the automatic gesture of looking down when entering, in that second when you still hope to see him coming, in the hand that almost moves by itself, as if it were still going to caress his head. They are small movements, reflections that love left recorded. And that's why they hurt so much. Because they are not an idea, they are a habit of the soul. There is also that other moment that almost everyone knows. When you go from one room to another, and for a moment you feel that something is missing behind you, because he followed you. To the kitchen, to the bathroom, to the sofa. Sometimes without making noise, sometimes just to lie down nearby. He didn't need prominence. It was enough for him to be where you were. And you don't always appreciate that while it's happening, because it seems normal. It seems part of life. Until one day you walk around the house and discover that no one is following you. And then you understand that that silent company supported more than you imagined. There are people who say that the hardest thing was not last day, it was the third day, or the first week, or that random moment when they dropped a piece of food on the floor and no one came. That absurd, everyday, minimal moment in which the heart understands something that the mind was still trying to deny. Because mourning for a dog is full of scenes like that. The plate that no longer moves from place to place, the bed where he slept and that no one wants to touch at all. The strap kept, the corner of the house that looked strange, not empty exactly, queer, as if he still had something, as if space remembered, as if things had absorbed his way of being in the world. And that confuses a lot of people, because they think they should get over it quickly, because sometimes they hear cold phrases said by people who never understood what it means to share life with an animal that knew you without words. But a dog does not occupy a small place in someone's life. It occupies invisible places, routine, humor, the energy of home, the feeling of company, the comfort of bad days. That's why the house changes so much when he leaves. It's not an exaggeration. It is not misunderstood attachment. It's just that his presence was involved in details that no one else saw. Maybe it still happens to you when you look at the place where he slept, that space that continues to say something, even if it is empty. Maybe you've even avoided moving certain things, not because you can't tidy up, but because doing so would make you feel like you're taking on too much. And sometimes you don't want to accept so quickly. Sometimes one needs to stay a little longer on that strange bridge between memory and absence. A woman once said that, for weeks, she kept clearing the space next to the couch where her dog lay down every night. Nobody asked him. Nobody was watching her. But his body continued to reserve that place for him, as if deep down he knew that love does not disappear at the same pace as habit. And one day, she understood something that made her cry. She wasn't holding on to a habit. I was honoring a bond. That happens to a lot of people, more than you imagine. People who continue talking loudly when entering the house. People who still look at the door at certain times. People who, although they try to continue, feel that something in the house stopped breathing the same. And maybe you have felt it too, in those simple moments that no one sees, when everything seems normal on the outside. But inside, there is someone missing who made the everyday something deeply alive. How could it not hurt if he was with you even in the simplest moments of every day? That's where a truth that is rarely said well begins. Mourning for a dog hurts not only for what was lost, but for everything that love had built without making a sound. That is why this void is not like others. Because he didn't just live in your house, it lived in your way of inhabiting it. And when you understand that, you begin to notice something even deeper. There are absences that are not felt as total distance, but as a presence that left traces so strong that it takes time for the heart to accept that it can no longer see it. And sometimes, right there, in those little things that no one explained to you, something begins to appear that goes beyond memory. At first, everything seems just absence, silence, broken routine, empty spaces. But as the days go by, something begins to change. It's not something big. It's not something you can easily explain. In fact, many times you're not even sure if it really happened, but it happens at very specific times. Normal moments. Moments when you're not thinking about anything special. And yet, you feel something. Like that moment when you are at home, distracted, and you think you hear a faint sound. Unclear. Not strong. Just familiar. as if something had touched the ground, as if paws had passed by for a second, just outside your field of vision. You stop. You look. And there is nothing. Then your mind tries to explain it quickly. It was the wind. It was the house. I'm imagining things. You continue with your day, but something inside you doesn't quite accept that explanation, because it wasn't just the sound, it was the sensation. That strange impression that for a second you were not completely alone. And that begins to repeat itself. Not every day, not constantly, but enough so that you can't ignore it completely. Sometimes it is when passing by a specific place in the house. Sometimes by sitting where you used to be with him. Sometimes right before bed, when everything is quiet and your mind lets its guard down. There are those who say that they have even felt that automatic impulse to move their feet carefully, as if there was still someone lying nearby. As if the body remembers something that the eyes can no longer confirm. And that's where the doubt appears. Because it's one thing to miss, and it is quite another to feel. Really feel that something is still there. One person said that, weeks after his dog died, he began to notice something strange every night. When I turned off, he turned on the lights and lay down, feeling a slight pressure next to his legs. Nothing strong, nothing I could prove, but always in the same place where his dog slept. At first he ignored it. She thought it was her mind, her need to not feel alone. But what threw her off was this. The feeling didn't appear when she thought about him. It appeared when she was calm, distracted, even when she had had a good day. It made him wonder something he had never considered before. What if it wasn't just memory? Because when the silence becomes too constant, any small change feels more intense, but also more significant. And that's where many people start to notice things that don't quite fit a simple explanation. They are not visions. They are not clear scenes. They are details, brief sensations, moments that last seconds but leave a mark that is difficult to ignore. And the most curious thing is that they are almost always linked to specific places. The place where I slept, the door where I waited, the corner where he used to stay silently looking at you, as if he understood everything without needing words. That type of memory is not just mental. It is corporal. It's spacey. It's emotional. And when something triggers all of that at the same time, it doesn't feel like just any memory. It feels like presence. But of course, that's where the mind comes into conflict. Because they taught you that when someone leaves, they leave completely. That what remains are memories. That anything else is imagination, necessity, or even denial. And part of you wants to believe that because that's what makes logical sense. But another part doesn't quite fit that explanation. Because what you're feeling isn't just nostalgia. It's something closer, more immediate, more alive. And that is uncomfortable. Because it puts you in a place where there are no clear answers. Where you don't know whether to trust what you feel or what you've been told is real. Where any conclusion seems incomplete. But there is something that cannot be denied. And these experiences are not rare. It happens to many people, more than those who talk about it. Normal people, with normal lives. That one day, without looking for it, they began to notice that the silence of the house was not as empty as it seemed. What if that moment when you thought you felt him close was not your imagination, but the most subtle way in which he found himself staying with you? Because maybe the mistake is not in what you feel. Maybe it's in how you were taught to interpret it. And that's what starts to open a crack. A little doubt. A possibility. The idea that perhaps what we call absence does not always mean that something ceased to exist. And right at that point, where the heart begins to question what the mind repeats, a conflict is born that is not easy to ignore, because feeling it close can comfort you, but it can also scare you. There is a part of grief that almost no one talks honestly about. It's not just the pain, it's the confusion. Because losing a dog is already devastating, but starting to feel things after they're gone can make you even more vulnerable. You don't just miss. You don't just remember. Sometimes you feel something so specific that you are later ashamed of having felt it. And there begins a silent fight within you. One part says, "I'm imagining it." The other responds, "But I felt it." And that shock is tiring. It's tiring because you're trying to be logical. You try to move forward. You try not to think about things you can't prove. But inside, there are moments that don't quite fit into the easy explanation. And not because you're looking for signs in everything. Many times it happens the other way around. Just when you're trying to distract yourself, when you're busying yourself with something simple, when it finally seemed like your mind was on something else, that feeling appears again. Then you doubt yourself. You wonder if the pain is playing tricks on you, if your need to feel close is creating experiences, if your heart is seeing what it wants to see. And since you don't want to seem exaggerated, you end up staying silent, keeping those little things that happen to you. That feeling in the hallway, that reflection when looking at the door, that brief moment when you'd swear you weren't alone. The hardest thing is not to feel it. The hardest thing is not knowing what to do with it, because we live in a world that accepts love for animals while they are alive, but often does not know how to accompany the mourning when they are gone. Much less understands what happens when that bond continues to feel active after death. Then the person who is experiencing this begins to correct himself. It is forced to minimize, to rationalize too much, to say cold phrases to each other to regain control. But the problem is that not everything human goes through logic first. There are things that the body registers before the mind can explain them. That doesn't mean everything is supernatural. It also doesn't mean you should turn every detail into a sign. It means something simpler and deeper, the bond with your dog. Left a real mark on you, an emotional, sensory, physical imprint. That is why its absence is not experienced only as an idea. It is lived in the skin, in habits, in perception. Science itself knows that deep ties shape our attention, our routines, and even the way the brain anticipates the presence of another. When we live with someone for years, and yes, a dog is also someone in a person's emotional life, our internal system learns their schedules, their sounds, their movements, their pauses. Learn to wait for it. Learn to feel accompanied in such a natural way that the absence is not processed suddenly. That's why sometimes grief makes you feel like it's still there. That has a real human basis. But here comes the important thing. That there is an emotional or neurological explanation does not cancel the spiritual value of what you experience. On the contrary, maybe it makes it more serious, because it shows how true that link was, to what extent his presence was integrated into your life. And when a bond is so deep, it doesn't disappear like a light goes out. Change. It transforms. It moves to another level of experience. Many try to solve this by choosing only one option. Either it's all imagination, or it's all a sign. But human experience rarely works so simply. Sometimes memory, love, and perception mix in a way that does not ask for a closed answer. Ask for respect. Respect for what has been experienced. Respect for pain. Respect for that intimate feeling that there is something in this love that has not yet ended. Think about this. If your dog was able to know you when no one else noticed what was happening to you, if he accompanied you on days when you didn't even have the strength to speak, if his gaze was enough to give you calm, why is it so hard for you to believe that a bond like that can leave a mark that goes beyond what is visible? You're not losing your mind for feeling it. You are not inventing it to remember it with your body. You're not failing by still talking to him quietly sometimes, or by looking at his photo as if he can still hear you. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And it also reveals something important. True love does not disappear at the rate that the calendar would like. A woman said something very simple after losing her dog. He said, "I knew he had died. I wasn't denying it. But there were nights when he felt peace in his favorite place in the house, and that peace seemed too much like him. That phrase touches something very deep, because it shows that it's not always about seeing or hearing something strange. Sometimes it's about recognizing a very specific emotional quality, a calm, a closeness, a form of presence that does not enter through the eyes, but through the soul. And perhaps that is what is most disconcerting. That doesn't always feel like something external. Sometimes it feels like something that envelops you, as if, by the second, the pain eased and in its place a soft certainty appeared. The certainty that that love did not end up breaking. The certainty that there is a part of the bond that is still alive, even if it no longer works as before. Perhaps what confuses you most is not having lost it, but feeling that, somehow, it is not completely gone yet. And when you get to that point, you are no longer alone in facing pain. You are facing a much bigger question, a question that touches the memory, the soul, and the very meaning of farewell. Because maybe the problem was never feeling too much. Maybe the problem was that no one taught you that some bonds don't end. They just stop expressing themselves in the way you knew. And when that begins to become clear, death no longer seems like a closed door. It seems like something else. A transition. Perhaps one of the things that breaks us the most inside when a dog leaves is that we do understand the word final. We do feel the weight of a farewell. We look at an empty bed, a still plate, a put-away leash, and we think about everything that will never happen again. He's not going to run to the door anymore. He's not going to follow us around the house anymore. He will no longer look at us in that way that seemed to understand even what we never said. But perhaps there is a profound difference between them and us, because human beings experience loss thinking about rupture. The dog lives love thinking about permanence. A dog does not accompany you making calculations about how much time he has left. It doesn't measure the bond like we do. It does not rationalize death as a definitive separation. He just loves. This. Stay while you can. And he gives his presence in a way so complete, so clean, so faithful, that it is difficult to believe that such a bond can be reduced only to a body that stops breathing. That's what so many people feel, even without knowing how to explain it, that the farewell was human. But the link? No. Because there is something about the love of a dog that doesn't seem to completely obey our rules. Something that doesn't fit with the cold idea that everything ends suddenly. They live so present it is, so united to the heart of the one they love, that for many owners it is almost impossible to feel that that connection was completely destroyed in a single moment. And it is not about denying death. It's about looking at the link in more depth. Think about what he was like with you. Your dog wasn't just by your side when everything was going well. I was also on your difficult days, in the moments when no one else understood your silence, in the small routines, in the low hours, in the tired returns, in the empty Sundays, in the ordinary days that seemed less burdensome simply because he was there. That kind of presence was not superficial. It was a form of company that went straight to the soul. That's why, when they leave, many people feel that the body is gone. But the relationship is not. As if something essential had remained intact. As if the way of being changed, yes, but not the reality of the bond. One person said that after losing his dog, he stopped asking for a big sign. I no longer expected clear dreams, nor strange noises, nor spectacular moments. She began to pay attention to something else, the way she felt when she thought about him calmly. And he realized that there were times when the pain did not come alone. He entered accompanied by a tenderness so alive, so present, that it did not seem to come only from memory, as if love continued to find a way to reach her, but now from a different place. That changes many things, because then the question stops being, did he leave or didn't he leave? And it becomes another. What if his way of staying with me doesn't depend on me being able to see him? That's where a new understanding begins. Softer, deeper, less desperate. The idea that maybe dogs don't understand goodbye like we do, because their way of loving is not built on the fear of losing. It is built from delivery, from loyalty, from a union that does not need words to be real. And when something like that truly touches a human life, it doesn't disappear like other things disappear. It transforms. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt anymore. Hurts, and a lot. Because the body misses the contact, the routine, the sounds, the look, the movement around the house. The human heart needs time to accept a visible absence. But it is one thing to accept that he is no longer physically there, and quite another to affirm that he is no longer there in every sense. Maybe that's why there are people who, over time, stop saying, "I lost it," and start to feel something different. No less sad, but yes, more true. Something like, "He's not like he used to be, but I don't feel like he's disappeared from my life." And that difference can heal a lot, because it takes away from death its feeling of absolute cut. It turns it into a shapeshifter, in a link transition, in a continuity that no longer passes through sight, but through living memory, through intuition, through unexpected peace, through those moments when the heart stops asking for proof and simply recognizes. Maybe your dog doesn't hold on to goodbye like you do, because for him, loving you was always a way to stay. When a person understands that, something inside begins to relax. Not everything, but something does. The idea of abandonment loosens. That brutal cutting sensation is weakened, and a new possibility appears, that the most faithful love you knew has not been interrupted, but rather taken to another plane of closeness. And right there, when the pain begins to coexist with a greater truth, the door opens to the most important revelation of all. Because perhaps the bond with your dog never depended only on his body. Maybe from the beginning it was something much deeper. There is a moment in grief when the person stops looking for answers outside and begins to recognize something inside. It doesn't happen all at once. It does not come as a great revelation with background music or as a perfect certainty. It comes in small moments, in an unexpected calm, in a memory that no longer only hurts but also embraces. In that rare moment when you think about him, it hurts. But at the same time, you feel living love, not finished love. And that's where everything begins to change. Because up to that point, the heart has been struggling with a very human idea, that loving and losing are things that cancel each other out. If you can't touch it anymore, then you just have to resign yourself. If he no longer responds, then the link is over. But real love doesn't always work like that. There are ties that do not depend only on physical presence to continue existing. There are bonds so deep, so faithful, so full of truth, that when the body disappears, they are not destroyed. They transform. That's what many people feel, even though it's hard for them to put it into words. They don't feel like their dog is back, like in a fantasy story. They feel something more intimate and truer, that never completely left, that the relationship changed form, but not essence, that there is still a company, a connection, a form of closeness that no longer comes through the eyes nor by the hands, but by another place, a quieter place, deeper, harder to explain, but also harder to deny when you have lived it. Maybe that's why some memories have a different strength. Not all. Some. There are memories that not only make you cry, they stop you, they surround you, they leave you with the feeling that he still has access to a part of you that no one else touches, as if his love had left an open door inside your soul. And every time something everyday touches you, a time of day, a corner of the house, a custom, a photo, an automatic gesture, you don't just feel nostalgia, you feel continuity. That's very important, because continuity is not the same as denial. Continuity is not pretending that nothing happened. It is recognizing that something true was not destroyed with death. The shape changed, yes. The body is no longer there, yes. The routine was broken, yes. But the bond can still be real in a new way. A less visible way, but no less profound. And when a person allows themselves to accept that, the grief does not disappear, but it stops being just darkness. Sense begins to appear. A different tenderness begins to appear. A peace begins to be born that does not come from forgetting, but from understanding. Understanding that perhaps the most valuable thing about that relationship was not limited to the time they shared in this life, but to the spiritual imprint that was sown between them. Because there are dogs that not only accompany, there are dogs that mark a before and after in a person's life. Dogs that arrived at the exact moment, who endured difficult processes, that were a refuge in hard seasons, who looked in a way that seemed to say, "I'm with you," even when no one else was. And when a bond touches that level, it is difficult to accept that everything is reduced to a physical absence. Intuitively, something inside you knows it was bigger than that there was something almost sacred in that relationship. Something that was not born only from habit, nor only from affection, nor only from coexistence. Something that seemed to unite two souls in a strangely perfect way. That's why so many people feel that their dog is still around during the most difficult times. Not necessarily with noises, not necessarily with spectacular signs, sometimes with a sudden peace, sometimes with a strength that appears when you need it most, sometimes with that feeling of company that comes just when you were about to break down. And maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe it's the new way the link found to continue taking care of you. Because if he was able to accompany you when he had a body, why does it seem impossible to you that he can also accompany you now from another place? This is where many people finally stop fighting with what they feel. Proof is no longer required. They stop thinking that they have to choose between love or reason, and they simply recognize a truth that gives them breath. Your dog didn't leave. He just stopped needing a body to be with you. That phrase touches something deep because it does not deny the pain. It does not erase the absence. He does not invent a fantasy to soften the loss. What it does is give it a new meaning. He says that death may have touched his body, but not necessarily the bond he built with you. He says that the truest closeness does not always depend on what is visible. It says that the purest love you knew may not have ended. It just changed its way of accompanying you. And when that really enters the heart, something falls into place. You begin to understand why you sometimes still feel it in certain places. Why some memories do not weigh as an ending, but as a presence. Why the link does not feel closed. Because maybe he never was. Maybe I was just waiting for you to stop looking at the relationship with the eyes of loss, to start feeling it with the eyes of the soul. And when that happens, you no longer interpret silence the same way. You no longer see the house only as the place where it was. You begin to feel that it is also the place where he continues to leave traces. Not like before, not in the same way, but in a way that still reaches you, in a way that still takes care of you, in a way that still reminds you that faithful love doesn't disappear when you stop seeing it. It becomes quieter, more subtle, deeper, and just because of that, more eternal. Maybe now we can go back to the beginning, to that sound, on his legs walking around the house, to that small noise that one day disappeared, and that, without you immediately understanding it, completely changed the way silence felt inside you. Because at the beginning it seemed that everything was about that, an absence, of an empty space, of a broken routine, from a house that no longer breathed the same. But after going through all this path, perhaps the question is no longer the same. Maybe you're no longer just looking at what's gone. Maybe you also start to look at what's left. What's next? What still lives in you in a way so real, so everyday and so deep, that it would be unfair to call it simply memory, because a memory usually stays behind. But there are links that are not left behind. There are links that walk with you, that appear in the middle of an ordinary day when no one else notices, in the reflection of looking at the door, in the habit of leaving a space free, in the way you still talk about him in the present tense, in the unexpected peace that sometimes comes when you miss him the most, in that corner of the house that never felt the same again, not because it was empty, but because it retained some of its love. And perhaps therein lies one of the most difficult and most beautiful truths to accept, that your house was not empty when he left. It was filled with a different presence, quieter, more subtle, but no less real for the heart that lived it. Yes, it hurts not to see it. It hurts not to touch it. It hurts not to really hear his footsteps, not to feel his body close, not to see him waiting for you like before. That part of grief doesn't go away with a nice phrase. That part deserves respect. It deserves time. It deserves tears. It deserves all those moments when your chest tightens when you look at a photo, when you remember the last day, when you pass by the place where you slept. But even within that pain, something else can begin to grow. A softer certainty. The feeling that loving like this was not a coincidence. The feeling that what they shared was not small. The feeling that such a faithful bond did not come into your life only to be broken, leaving nothing but absence. Maybe he came to show you something bigger. That true love doesn't always end where the body ends. That there are companies that continue to exist at another level of presence. That some souls do not need to continue being seen to continue being felt. And maybe that's why, even if the months go by, even if your routine changes, even if you learn to continue, there is a part of you that can't talk about him as someone completely gone. Because deep down you don't feel that way. You feel pain, yes. You feel nostalgic, yes. But you also feel a strange continuity, a closeness that sometimes appears without warning, like an invisible caress in the middle of the day. That doesn't erase the loss, but it transforms it. It makes it something deeper than a farewell. It makes it a bond that changed form, but not in truth. And when a person understands that, they no longer need to fight so much against the silence of the house, because you begin to discover that that silence is not empty. It is full of memory, love, emotional traces, small traces of a company that still means something today. Maybe you don't see it. You may never be able to fully explain it. Maybe there will even be days when you doubt again. But if you ever felt like he was still close in some way, don't be so quick to betray that feeling. Don't dismiss it just because it doesn't fit into simple words. Sometimes the soul recognizes before the mind understands. And perhaps that is what makes the bond with a dog so special, that even after leaving, it still finds a way to take care of you from the love it left living in you. That's why this video wasn't just about loss. It was about meaning, about understanding that connection may have been deeper than you thought, about looking at your pain with more tenderness, about stopping seeing your sensitivity as weakness, and about opening space to a possibility that has comforted many people, that your dog did not disappear from your life. He just stopped being with you in the way you knew. And now think about that house again, in that hallway, at that door, in that place where I slept, in that silence that one day broke you inside. Maybe today you no longer need to see it the same way. Maybe that silence can also become a bridge between memory and hope, between absence and presence, between what your eyes no longer find and what your heart still recognizes. If your dog also left signs in your life, or if you ever felt like he was still around after leaving, tell us in the comments. Many people watching this video need to read that they are not the only ones. And if in your heart you know that that bond is still alive, also write, "My dog is still with me." Because sometimes a phrase like that doesn't just express what you feel, It also gives hope back to someone who today is trying to survive the silence of their own home. And maybe, in the end, that was what that love wanted to continue doing. A company, even now. Even so.